Welcome to my show, When Everyone Wins, where a key goal I have for you is shifting from power over and under to power within and between. I'm your host, Judy Ryan. In each episode, I'll share my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I'll help you build trust and emotional and social intelligence. My show, When Everyone Wins, is about creating a life you love and helping others do the same. Welcome back, everyone, to When Everyone Wins, where we're working on shifting power over and power under to power within and power between, and doing that through the conditions and conversations that we use to create that kind of win-win environment. And what I would like to do is start off by introducing you to my very esteemed guest. He's got a bio that I want to read in its entirety, and I'm very excited about this because my hope is that you as listeners will understand a little bit about the really healthy psychology that is underlying win-win culture. And so I want to introduce my guest, Jay Colker. Jay has two distinct phases of his career. For 20 years, he has done clinical work as a licensed clinical professional counselor. And he also has 32 years of organizational development work as a consultant and as a senior human resources executive in a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Woohoo! In addition to his master's degree in counseling psychology, Jay also obtained an MBA and a Doctor of Management degree in organizational leadership. For 11 years, Jay was the Chief Learning Officer for Shore Bank, the largest and oldest community development bank in the United States. Jay was responsible for employee training, leadership development, and enhancing performance within all lines of business. Jay's also consulted internationally and was instrumental in introducing customer service skills to institutions in the Republic of Georgia and Azerbaijan, and has also consulted in Mongolia, Armenia, Israel, and India. Woo, gosh, I'm just blown away, Jay. Presently, Jay maintains a management, coaching, and consulting practice. He's the founder of Crowdsourced Coaching. We're going to be talking about that today, which engages leaders in collaborative discussions to enhance performance and development. He currently is senior adjunct faculty in the Department of Leadership and Applied Psychology at Adler University, teaching doctoral students in industrial organizational psychology. Finally, Jay is the author of a fantastic international bestseller. It's titled Aligned Leadership, which is available through Amazon. And we have that link available to those of you that are listening. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, Judy. I am just so excited. Thank you for that introduction. It makes me sound old.
Well, hey, it just makes you sound wise. And I just want to say that one of the things Jay and I are going to be talking about in layman's terms, hopefully you won't feel like you want to snooze off, but some concepts that we both love that really are instrumental in expanding the potential of people. And we want to talk about the psychology of Alfred Adler, and that's one of the main reasons I invited Jay here. And how does Adlerian psychology create win-win culture? So I'm thinking maybe we could start off by doing a little bit of that, Jay, is trying to keep that down at that layman's level, because you and I could geek out like crazy on this.
Yeah.
But would you kind of help me frame that conversation with some of the beliefs that you and I hold about people and the use of power and all of that?
Perfect.
Okay, well, go for it, Jay.
So are you asking me if I might just review in layman's terms some of the key principles that are operating within the Adlerian framework?
Yes, and you and I can kind of go back and forth a little bit on that because we both have
Perfect.
an understanding of that.
So there's a concept today that's almost a buzzword that gets thrown around in organizations, and that's belonging. But Adler and one of his disciples, Rudolf Dreikurs, very much believe that belonging is a core foundational principle. That growing up, we all want to belong and find a place of significance, where we fit in, where we have value. And Dreiker said that children are very good observers, but terrible interpreters, and they may develop misguided notions of their place among others. For example, myself, I grew up with an insatiable need to be liked. And that was my sense of belonging. If I was liked and accepted, I felt, in flow. I felt very much okay. And if I sensed that somebody didn't like something, it really put me out of balance. And I
Yeah.
had to do a lot of work over the years to learn how to live in a world more collaboratively and cooperatively. The other idea is that these perceptions of where we fit in, where our place is somewhat biased. They're not based on absolutes. They're based on how I interpret the world. It's not genetics, it's not environment that's key to my development, Adler said. It's my own ability to draw my own conclusions.
Yeah.
And that's really optimistic, Judy, because if I master what I'm choosing, then I can adjust and change it. And
Yes.
for myself, for example, I learned to defer my need to be liked. I could focus more cooperatively with others and gain that sense of being liked in a different way, even though that was still rather important to me.
Yeah.
And that particular place of belonging, or what Adler called a final fictional goal, is something that unifies anyone, mind, body, and emotions, all working towards that goal. So, for myself, for example, if I were to interact with friends in an intimate relationship or at work, that need to be liked was always primary for me. And I put that out in front, and I was drawn to that. And that explained much of my motivation for doing things. And the other thing, did you want to add something, or do you want me to
Well,
just
no,
finish one?
I want you to finish. Go forward.
Okay.
I'm just taking some notes here because I'm thinking, wow, this audience can really relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. So there's really two types of movement, vertical versus horizontal. And if I became so over focused on my own need to be liked, I'm thinking of me, my own needs, how to achieve my own goals. And I function in what Adler and Dreikers called a vertical plane. Superior is better, inferior is worse. And also, we're trained from early years that we have to be perfect, that we can't make mistakes, that we get criticized. And so, striving to be above and to achieve in itself, that's not a bad goal. But the opposite of vertical movement is horizontal movement, assuming we already have a place, that we already have value. We can forget ourselves and focus on others and the tasks at hand. And hopefully we don't make mistakes, but we're going to do that because we're not perfect, right? But the issue is not focusing on the mistake. Hopefully we don't repeat them again and again and again, but the idea is to collaborate and where we can add value and have a sense of community and mutual support, mutual acceptance that really becomes a foundation for how we live and work together. And when people are threatened, they fall back in their silos. And
Yeah.
I don't want to represent a particular political persuasion, but people are rigidly in their lanes, believing they're right and others are wrong, and there's less opportunity to really engage collaboratively in discussions because we're all more similar than different, but we hold on to these differences as if that sets us apart.
Yes, and it's so I love what you're talking about because none of us really like that vertical plane. We don't like that top down, superior, inferior. Even when we're quote unquote in the superior position, there's always the fear we're going to lose our position. And there's that sense of inferiority underlying, holding on with that grasping. I know I personally, I literally pray every day, please release me from the need for love, approval, and acceptance from others because I can't be in service. And I know that Adler talks about belonging and significance is best served when we feel that we have contributions to make and we see ourselves as already being enough, that we have a place, like you said. And yet, so many of us have that conditioning that we're somehow broken or inferior. And Adler actually used that phrase, inferiority complex. Brene Brown today is very famous for talking about it in terms of shame. But the way out of it is getting off of the vertical and creating that horizontal where everyone wins, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And for me, if I'm on that vertical plane, I feel like I have to hide.
Yes,
Maybe it's partly from shame, but I can't really reveal myself because somehow I'll appear weak or
yes.
less than in other people's eyes. And so I love the example of a team. They rarely share their development goals with each other because it's an embarrassment if I have something to develop
Right.
versus one.
As if we're already supposed to have all the answers, not ever be vulnerable to anything that we don't know.
Exactly. And one person's strengths is another person's development needs. And yet we separate ourselves out and we inhibit full development through engagement of others.
Yeah. So we're in that. So we lack what people are now calling psychological safety. The psychological safety that I can show up with what I know and with what I don't know, where we can be vulnerable and we can be transparent because we've created the environment where it's all about being in service and about being able to find that belonging and
Yeah.
significance in useful ways. That's what Adler talks about, useless and useful. And that's why we even show the radical changes in a prison system when people realize we are more alike than different. We all want that belonging and significance.
Absolutely. And that sense of being unsafe gets further reinforced because, oh my goodness, what would happen if my boss sees that I made a mistake? Or I didn't do something well enough, or this month we didn't hit our numbers,
Yes.
right? Then the outcomes become more important than the methods to achieve them. And there's a shortened a sense of openness and inclusion and a bias towards driving towards outcomes. And if things are broken, then I, as the boss, have to fix it all. And you're the one that needs to change. And it gets to be very convoluted.
Well, and it ties so closely into the conditioning in most of our societies, especially in the United States, to punishment and reward dynamics, as opposed to everything is a learning opportunity and that you have the courage to make mistakes. And that's what I love about some of the people that followed under Adler, like Dreikers, who taught us how to understand that all misbehavior comes from discouragement and that there's a way to understand and influence that discouragement into back into belief in oneself. And that's really a critical shift for most people. That's why I do want to mention this, Jay. You mentioned that the employees are afraid of showing their vulnerabilities. I equally see the leaders afraid to
Yeah.
show their vulnerabilities. And so you've got these artificial separations of I know best, father knows best, mother knows best, within workplaces because of the way we've even raised families.
So it's so interesting, and there's a very interesting study that I read that says even when leaders want to work from a democratic, collaborative perspective, employees still see them in a power role.
Yes.
That this idea that mutual respect and mutual acceptance and that we're among equals just doesn't seem to happen because employees are trained to see leaders somehow as above them. And
Well,
so,
Jay, one of the things that I want to mention here is I know you more specifically have worked with huge amount of leaders. In the difference between your work and my work a little bit is we have kind of had a forced model where the leaders at all the levels of leadership are interspersed in leading and rotating leadership of small groups and even doing reverse mentoring, which kind of forces them to have to face that we're all more alike than different, even if they don't exactly want to. And a lot of times in the beginning, the leaders don't want to. They would rather stay in a little homogenous group of executives or, director level or such, because they don't really want to be exposed that way. But when they are exposed that way, it is kind of that open forum type of a model.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just for the reader's interest, in one organization over 4 years, I worked with 900 leaders and managers
Yes.
in small 2-day training venues, and advanced coaching training. But that's just an example of the scope of some of the work I've done with leaders.
Yeah. And just having leaders understand uh, the way that we can view conditions that help everyone win, conditions that help everyone relax into that horizontal where it's all about really being in service. When we can do that, when we can at least let the leaders understand those principles, that's a huge shift for them to begin with. And then to help them eventually, like we're doing with our work, meld with all the levels in an organization. It kind of reminds me of when I raised my children, and by the time they were 5, they all knew how to run a family meeting because we would rotate that leadership.
Yeah.
And that's hard for a leader because a leader kind of wants to steamroll and prove and strive and all those superiority things. At least I did. And I had to learn how to be a good follower to people that were not in that authority role.
Well, so yeah, in one international manufacturing organization, I coached the senior leader for over a year, and he had I don't know, a few thousand employees under his auspices worldwide. And he was so task focused, he would go into a different country and have an all staff meeting, and he would jump right into the task, and he wasn't connecting. And
Right.
I had to have him think about some strategies of telling a story, telling a human interest, sharing something personal about himself, because that made him much more human and it gave him the ability to connect much more. But he was so focused on driving the business that he missed the people side.
Yes, yes, and that's a really big part of the principles of Adler and Adlerian psychology is the importance of the human systems. How do we help people to have this useful way of contributing and participating and collaborating? That's what really builds businesses, right? It's really what causes businesses to be innovative and to be exceptional and to be have competitive advantage and to move with where the future is heading. And yet
Yeah.
we hold so tightly to the conventional ways of doing all of that.
Well, we do. And so there's an issue around risk tolerance levels. Right? And that's partly related to what we were talking about earlier around safety, because businesses are so wired that they can't make mistakes. And even if they talk about, okay, we want innovation, uh, do leaders give their direct reports an opportunity to make a mistake, to fail, to do it in a way that they wouldn't necessarily do from their years of experience? But experiential learning is so critical. But if the risk tolerance levels are so small that leaders won't allow people to do that, then people won't be willing to contribute and take the risk of stepping out and seeing where they can add value, because the risk of being slapped down or criticized or even worse is so much higher when there's such a low tolerance for risk within an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I see a lot, and you probably do too, are employees that are afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of the risks of making mistakes, of trying new things, of speaking up. All of those things are real. I also see that the leaders are afraid of losing their employees. They're afraid of making mistakes or being seen as somehow inferior. And they feel that they have to hide who they are because they're afraid employees are going to take advantage of that vulnerability or leave,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
It's so interesting. I shared when we were preparing for this discussion an example of what was titled shocking turnaround. Would it
Yes.
be useful to share that example?
Oh, yes. Share several if you'd like, because they're all very much aligned with creating the.
Yeah. So I was actually teaching at another university, and one of my students online, I was teaching, one of my students was on active duty in Afghanistan during the war. And she was in charge of a vehicle maintenance department where they had to repair vehicles to have them ready for service in the war and so on. And she emailed me that she was failing miserably, that they only had done 24 services in a month, and that's well below where they were, and nothing had changed very much, although they did lose a number of people. And so she just asked me what could she do, and in a matter of 2 minutes I gave her 5 suggestions: have an all hands on deck meeting, leave rank at the door, have people brainstorm what the issues are, you leave the room so nobody has to risk stepping up and being open in a way that is beyond their safety limits. And she did all that, and she learned some unbelievable things. And she shared this a month later with the title of an email, Shocking Turnaround. And she said she had talked to her subordinate supervisors that they had to leave rank at the door, that maybe she knew it, but maybe they didn't know it, that they wanted to work collaboratively with these soldiers that were part of this maintenance department. And she said everything turned around. Where they had only done 24 services the month before, they had done over 140 services. and
Oh,
and she learned that they didn't like to work evenings, and she didn't really know that because she had making threats previously and doing all kinds of things. And then she said she came to the work one day, and they were still working at 5:30. And she said, we're the real warriors, because she had shared the impact that they had in the whole organization and so on. And she said they were so surprised with the outcomes that they sent down inspectors. And she shared with her boss the outcomes. And she said her boss was upset. And the reason why he was upset is because he didn't believe in all this BS. It's command and control, and you order the people, and they should just work and do things. And even in an organization such as the military, where you have that hierarchy and those marching orders and accountability, soldiers were pushing back through their demotivation and so on and so on. And she said she didn't care what her boss thought, because she didn't honestly know what all it all meant, but she was just so thrilled with the outcomes, and the inspectors were so thrilled. But so even in a traditional hierarchical top down organization, you can still have great outcomes when you treat employees with mutual respect, where they have the opportunity to be involved and contribute.
I love that story. And I love the fact that you talked about how, even in the face of a success, her success was so undeniable he still was holding on with resistance to the old way of doing things, even when it wasn't as helpful.
That's right.
It's also interesting to me because in what you're describing, you taught her to put rank at the door and to get out of the room and let them have what is often called the results-oriented work environment, where they are given the goals, but they are coming up with how they're going to solve it, which gives them that sense of horizontal relationship where they're focusing on how do we work collaboratively to cause this outcome, not how
Yeah,
do we prove ourselves.
right.
But what I love to see is the day, and I'm sure it will come, the more that leaders do what she did in one form or another, whether you do it the way that we're doing it with life work systems or the way you're doing it in that instance, where eventually they'll invite her to stay in the room because they already know she trusts them. They already know that she's paying attention, that she's putting her money where her mouth is. A lot of times employees will say, well, organization act like they want our input, but they really don't. They
Mm.
act like they care about us, but they really don't. But when you demonstrate it, then people start wanting you to come in the room with them.
So I have an example, and the person will remain nameless, but um, this was a gentleman that was in a department role within Clinton's administration.
Oh, wow.
And after Clinton left office, this gentleman came to work at Shore Bank that you mentioned earlier, where I was chief learning officer. And he told me a story that the first 2 weeks in his role, he went down and he rolled up his sleeves, he took up a chair and worked side by side with the line workers in his department for 2 weeks. And he did what they did and he learned the ropes. And he said he could never have achieved the relationships that he had with those workers and how dedicated and committed they were if he had not taken the time to be a line worker himself and to demonstrate his willingness to get into their shoes.
Yes. And that whole notion of sharing power with them and seeing the value of what they're doing and walking in their shoes and having that empathy. And it creates that co-empathy with one another. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those dynamics when we come back from our break. Back, everyone. I'm so excited to have my guest today, Jay Colker, who has gobs and gobs of practical experience and amazing stories to match his great amount of education and really that commitment to excellence in the way that he has developed his skills, his knowledge, and he brings it all in practical applications that create win-wins between people.
Well, thank you, Judy. But it's not about me. It's about the work, and it's about the viewers and you. And
Well, I
I,
respectfully disagree to some extent, Jay, because you are the gift to this audience today because of your vast experience and knowledge. And I'm just so grateful for you being here.
thank you. Where do you want to go next?
Well, we started talking before the break about empathy and compassion and really what a lot of people are calling servant leadership. I'm not a huge fan of that term because it sounds like the leaders are only being servants, where I think the real goal is helping everyone be servants. And I think your stories are illustrating that mutual respect builds, that empathy and compassion builds. Could you talk a little bit more about how that occurs and how you really work to help people get there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Um, what comes to mind is another story,
Yes.
right? I was working with a senior vice president of one of the departments at Shore Bank, and she said her managers needed management training. And I said, so what are the issues? What's going on? And she said, well, they're coming to her for everything. They don't have the ability to make any decisions on their own. and I started to talk with her about being in the hub and being that mama and taking care of everybody, and that was part of the problem. And I said, instead of management training, I wanted to use a version, what I have ended up calling crowdsourced coaching. And these managers, this was during the height of the financial crisis, and they were already working 70 hours a week, right? Trying to save the institution and get people from defaulting on their loans and all kinds of things. And I suggested to the senior vice president that I wanted to meet with the managers as a group 2 hours once a week for 10 weeks.
Mm,
And the first, and I said, I will empower them so they don't have to come to you.
mhm.
And so the first week they came in and they're angry. "Oh, I don't know why we need this, blah, blah, blah." And I trained them to share their common problems, to solve solutions together. And one manager said another department he learned wasn't going to do work anymore. And he had to go to his boss, the senior vice president, and have her really communicate with the other department. And I said to him, "So why aren't you going to communicate?" He said, "Am I allowed to?"
Yeah,
He had no sense of his own power, his own
yeah.
autonomy, and we worked with the rest of the group to coach him on how to best do that. And the next week he came back, he said, "You would not believe what happened. We had a complete misunderstanding of what the other department was going to do, and we were able to have this wonderful collaborative discussion. We worked it out, and it was wonderful that we didn't go to our boss, because it was just it would have reinforced the power and the anger and resentment that we couldn't collaborate." And so those were examples that happened regularly. And by the 10th week, I said to the group, your boss is only contracted for this work for 10 weeks. And one cute manager says, "What do you mean? You want to release us?" "Oh, no, we're not letting you go."
I
And
love it.
I
Yeah.
had to go back to the boss, and we've renegotiated once a month, and I work with them for another year once a month. But the power and the being able to be turned on and to work more collaboratively with each other was just phenomenal.
Okay, it gives me chills, that story, because what I love about it is, in a way, it's like a lot of people are in arrested development, as though they're still little children that have to go and get permission and not get spanked for anything. And what he did was what Adler calls putting them all in the same boat, but also giving them the respect and the recognition that she had, that they had faith in them. And over time, they started having faith in themselves. You
That's
talk
right.
about it as power. He didn't even know he had the power to go do something on his own initiative. And so I absolutely love that, because I think people don't realize how hamstrung they are from the way that we've been conditioned.
Well, and I also had to coach the senior leader, because the symbiotic relationship of her needing to be the mother hen and the hub
Yes,
really gave the message that if you do something on your own, you'll take away my value.
yes. I'll lose status
I'll
instead,
lose status, right?
and yet,
Or
and yet,
I'll,
yeah, and yet you gave her more ability to work on the growth of the business, or
exactly, the other strategy issues that were
yeah.
so critical, 'cause she didn't have to get tied up in the everyday minutia.
Right. It's a really big dilemma that people are unconscious of. If I'm not the most important, if I'm not needed 24/7, then somehow I am going to be less respected. And that's not true. I'm sure that on some level over time, she recognized, I feel more fulfilled and I feel more proud of myself that I helped develop leadership in other people. But at first, it felt like all she was going to do was lose, lose, lose.
That's exactly right. And it's even at the employee level. I worked with one department. A manager came to me. He was rather green, and I think it was his first role as a manager. But there were two employees in the department that hated each other and were at odds with each other. And it became so exaggerated that they wouldn't talk to each other, and they would go through the manager and they would say, John, can you tell Sarah to do X? And John dutifully would go to Sarah and say, Sarah, Mary needs you to do X. And he didn't know as a manager of how to get out of that. And it became so dramatic that the entire department got polarized in two camps.
Gosh, Jay, I have stories exactly like that. And it's like middle school all over again.
Exactly. And so I interviewed one-on-one each of the employees in the department, and then I brought them together to summarize what I've learned. And I also coached the manager to set boundaries and limits. You don't have to like each other, but you have to work together. And if you can't work together without coming through me, then we have a more serious problem that we have to address. And I worked with the group to figure out the solutions.
Yes.
And the department just shined after that.
Yes, it's almost like it's never too late to have a happy childhood because we didn't get what we needed, the conditions, the tools, the concepts, the support systems in order to live into being more resourceful on our own without
Well,
having that authority figure.
that's exactly right. And the other thing is people shy away from conflict. They don't know how to address it. They experience it as resistance. They're resistant. Other people are interacting in a way that's not right. And so we've never been trained that conflict is actually not a bad thing. It's how we best align, how we really address those issues that make a huge difference.
Yeah, and the sad and ironic part of it is people don't know how to address conflict. They don't know how to feel secure in that conflict, that it's not going to blow up in their face and get worse or cause them to be disliked or all those things. And yet, because they don't have those skills, they're pretending as though they already have them. And none of us really already have them, or most people don't already have them.
And we're not trained in giving and receiving feedback. So if I take a moment to share an observation or a concern, other people I fear may get defensive. And
Yes.
their reaction may be from that vertical place. And instead of, okay, how do we best address and accomplish these things. Um, when I worked at ShoreBank, I rolled out a customer a service change initiative, and as part of that, I offered internal service feedback cards. Anybody in the organization could give feedback to anybody else anonymously if they wanted, because of the nature of the culture, and we published the positive statements minus names of who made the comments, and we shared stars of the month, service stars, and the negative feedback. I promised employees it would never go to the boss. I would personally give the feedback to the person and give them an opportunity to hear what others were saying and an opportunity to make change. And in the first few months, almost a year of the initiative, I was getting 400 feedback cards a month,
Yes.
right? And then it's tempered off, either because people got tired of the initiative or change was happening. Probably both occurred,
Yes,
but
improvement. They had less to complain about over time.
exactly. But most people walk on eggshells about thinking about giving feedback to somebody else.
Right. There's again that fear of I'll lose my esteem. I might even lose my job, or I might lose my employee if I'm the employer. So we're up against all of that risk aversion, all of that conventional way of being conditioned. And so when we come back from a break, let's talk about how to overcome that resistance to make those breakthroughs. Because otherwise, we're going to continue to do power over and power under, not power
Perfect.
within or power
Yeah,
between people. So,
perfect.
welcome back, everyone, to When Everyone Wins with my guest, Jay Colker, talking about how to create the conditions and conversations within a workplace that really lead to the expansion of human potential, the expansion of collaboration and innovation. And Jay and I were talking during the break a little bit about how there's so much resistance to overcome, both on the individual level, but also on the strategic level with the leadership of any organization. So Jay, will you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been talking quite a bit about the individual level, right? And what people can do to move from the vertical to the horizontal plane, to feel safer, to have less risk. But really, there's an overarching strategy at the senior executive level. And they get so caught up in um, quarterly numbers and
Mhm.
achieving results that that's their language that they need to focus on. And often HR executives or talent management, learning and development executives make a mistake because they talk about human capital focus uh, work in ideal terms. It's the right thing to do. People will feel better. They need to feel more satisfied. And while true, business leaders really need to understand by focusing more collaboratively that there are business outcomes. And interestingly, Gallup did a study, I think a year or two ago, and they talked about the business case for engagement, but
Mhm.
engagement really encompasses a holistic sense of feeling valued and respected and having a seat at the table and collaborating around decisions and all the things we talk about lead to that engagement. And their study was quite interesting. Uh, the business case for engagement means 20% higher productivity, 24% to 49% decreased turnover, 10% increased customer satisfaction, 21% higher profits, a retention. 59% of people are less likely to look for a new job in the next 12 months, 41% lower absenteeism, and 48% fewer safety incidents. If
Yes,
that's not the justification for creating a strategy, then I don't know what is.
I
But
know.
what's also interesting, Judy, is managers will spend, or senior leaders will spend hours and hours, looking at capital spreadsheets, looking at their resources and loans and capital expenditures. But when you ask them to spend a little time on human capital development, having succession meetings, talking about key employees and what they need to be better supported, having systems in place of councils or places where people can really have a seat at the table and influence strategy and direction, even annual goals, they don't justify spending the time.
Right.
They they think it's a waste of time or they're somehow not being useful. But look at these numbers, and employees are the largest expense on the balance sheet. And if
Yeah.
you ask an HR executive how much it costs to replace a mid-level person, it's probably $10,000 to
Yeah.
$12,000 of
Yeah.
lost productivity, of actual time spent in interviewing and retraining, loss of customer knowledge, loss of customer relationships, all those other numbers that I shared with you. But somehow senior leaders really lose sight of that.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because in the face of all of that evidence, and even in the face of where organizations are operating differently than the command and control, where they're really addressing the importance of the human asset, the human condition being the priority, not profit first. Profit's important, but people and principles and purpose first. When you see the evidence, it's overwhelmingly clear that it's a good thing to invest in people. And yet, even the leaders are sometimes in that place of being afraid to step off the cliff of what they know to try something that they don't know. And I know that you talked a little bit about how you actually help people, in addition to giving them those facts that you just gave, which are amazing. You ask questions, you do certain things to help people to start to come to that awareness on their own and overcome their own resistance. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is that you need to call it what it is to yourself, right? If I'm talking with you in this conversation right now, and you turn away, your eyes roll up, you sigh, you give some body language that I've said something which is not off base, we're misaligned.
Right.
You're demonstrating resistance in that moment, even if you don't realize it,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, the first thing is to say, to use myself as an instrument and to say, Judy, I don't know if I've misread something, but when I said those last comments, you turned your head away, you seemed a little distracted, your eyes rolled up, at least as I saw it.
Yeah.
Um, could it be there was something about what I said that was a little bit off for you? So that could it be question. First of all, sharing my own observations, and I'm not saying I'm right. It seemed to me that you, when you turned your head away, that I didn't quite understand what that meant.
Well, Jay, it's also beyond that because as you're asking the question, you're being humble enough to say, is it anything that I did? Have I done anything to intimidate you or to cause this? And that is something that employees aren't used to hearing, or children aren't even used to hearing with their parents, right?
Yeah, and then the second aspect is we think guessing is disrespectful,
Mhm.
but especially, or we think that drawing conclusions is disrespectful. In a way, it is,
Mhm.
right? If I gave you a you message
Yes.
and I said you turned away, you rolled your eyes, you seemed to not really like what I was saying, that's a whole lot different than the way I originally
Yes.
framed it to you. And then people respond when they feel heard, when they
Right.
feel understood. And so, could it be, is it possible questions? I can throw out, I don't want to throw out 10 because people will get lost in too much
Right.
information. But if I threw out three or four guesses to you, if I said, Judy, uh, unless I misunderstood something, your eyes rolled up, your body language changed. Would it be all right if I offered a guess or two as to what I'm seeing?
Right, right.
You know,
There's a
and that
humility, and it's not disrespectful. It's very respectful and it's very engaging them in that.
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
And so I might say, could it be question about me? Could it be that I framed something in a way that was uncomfortable for you? Or
yes,
could it be that it led you to think of 10 other things that, my comments to you led you to want to pursue, but in the process, we lost sight of where we were at the moment.
yes,
And
yes,
I might make other guesses, or could it be that our conversation is going too long and you're kind of tired and this is a good place to end it for another day?
yes.
And just those three vectors of guesses
Yeah.
give a, or is it something else that might be a fourth area I might raise?
What I love about what you're saying is when you were talking at the outset about the way that you felt belonging was to be liked. What I felt was missing when I was growing up, and the interpretation I took away was around not feeling seen and heard, especially by my parents, because they were so decisive about everything, that they didn't really have curiosity. They didn't really ask questions like, could it be? Or what do you think about it? Or what is going on in your mind right now? And I think that is a beautiful part of the Adlerian principles, is helping people to not only feel that you have respectful questions, but that you want to hear what they have to say, whether you even agree or not.
And then there's another question which I absolutely love, and I realized after the fact that I didn't put it in the book I wrote, but it's really the issue of probabilities. So if I were to say to you, Judy, on a scale of 0 to 100, how aligned are we in our discussion right now? What number, Judy, would you put on our discussion? What number would you put on it? If I gave you a 0, not aligned at all, to 100, we couldn't be more aligned. What number would you put
I
on
would put
it?
100 on it, just because I understand everything that you're saying and I value it
Yeah,
so deeply.
perfect. But if somebody says 90, I might think, wow, that's a wonderful score in today's language. But I don't care about the 90, I care about the 10,
Right.
right? What else could I do to
Yeah.
close that gap a little bit? Where
Yeah.
are we still misaligned?
Yeah.
Because that's the most important issue.
Exactly. We do that all the time in our work when we help people to look at whether they have unresolved issues with one another. We say on a scale of 1 to 10, not 1 to 100, is your relationship at a 10? Meaning, is there anything unresolved? And if they say, no, it's at a 7, our next question is, what would help it move to an 8? And it
Right.
starts, and we give them other questions as well. But there's something so respectful, not only about the questions we ask, the humility with which we ask them, but their ability to be heard in whatever they want to answer with. So, Jay, this has been such a treat for me. It truly is 100% for me. And it's because I value so much the principles that you and I have been talking about today. And I want people that are listening that maybe have heard something that kind of triggered their excitement or their curiosity to know where they can learn more about all of
Yeah.
these things. And I would like for you to tell them about your book.
Sure. So, do you know what a tuit is?
Get around to it.
Yeah. Yeah, for those that don't know it, it's a little coin that has the word to it on it. And for years I said I should write a book about dealing with resistance, but I just haven't gotten around to it. So I gave myself the to it, and I finally wrote the book, published in 2023, towards the last quarter. And really, it's Adlerian focus. So I start with really discussing foundational principles, and then, as I noted, we all have what Adler called the lifestyle, a cognitive belief system, which leads to our perceptions of where we belong, where we have a place. And so I talk about the development of the lifestyle, and so people can really plug in for themselves a little bit more how they have evolved. And while sometimes we're blind to ourselves, there's a lot of work we can do on our own, and the book gives a guide of how to best do that. And then I spend a chapter talking about building and maintaining relationships and mutual respect, mutual responsibility, acceptance, trust, all those things that really have been themes that we've touched on today. And
Yeah.
then I cover tools and techniques for dealing with resistance. And then I have a chapter on practical applications where I share some of these stories and others
Yes.
of how I applied them. And then the last part of the book is guidelines for all employees. And so the book is Aligned Leadership, Building Relationships, Overcoming Resistance, and Achieving Success. And I'm proud that it achieved international bestseller status, and
Yeah.
that it's available on Amazon, either in the US or even through the overseas Amazon sites.
Jay, I'm so glad you held the book up, because sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words also. And what I want to say about your work and the work of Adler and the application in the world today is that the world is moving faster than ever. We have more complexity. we have more things coming at us like technology, and how do we move into the next phase of what life is like, diversity, technology, emotional and social intelligence. How do we wind all that together? And I really believe that what you and I have learned from Adler and from those that have come behind him is that when we provide the right conditions and the right conversations and the right processes and support that go along with all of that, we can create a new way of operating in the world of work, where everybody can put aside their fears and they can come from the joyful part of us. You know, when I think of Adlerian psychology, I think about how it's often overcoming the unfortunate interpretations we've made so that we can be happy and productive in a joyful and easy way.
Absolutely. And if we took Adler's concept of social interest to really function on the horizontal plane and to put the interests of others beyond our own needs, we would have 50-60% less problems in the world that we have today.
Yes. So thank you for geeking out with me and helping our audience to really enjoy and appreciate a new vision for a win-win kind of workplace environment. Thank you so much, Jay.
Judy, thank you so much for the opportunity.
You've been listening to When Everyone Wins, where we're shifting power over and under to power within and between. I'm Judy Ryan, your Transformation Talk Radio host. Tune in each second and fourth Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time to learn new concepts and tools and listen to conversations I have with thought leaders and change agents. You'll also see real-world applications of what I'm covering so that you experience the power of the concepts and tools I share. In each episode, I bring you my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I invite you to call in with your unique stories and questions. The path to ensure that everyone wins depends on our ability as people to create a life we love and help others do the same. For more information, visit lifeworksystems.com.